this video, well, this video is a continuation. It's the next part of my thumb release video, which is rapidly actually turning into a history of the thumb release video. Now, just want to clear up a few things first. Now, firstly, it seems as though a couple of you guys have got the wrong end of the stick. You're not quite grasping what it is I'm trying to do. I am not trying to debunk the connection between thumb release and horse archery. I am not trying to claim that it isn't a thing and it's not the right thing, and I'm not trying to do anything negative about it at all. What I am interested in is trying to figure out the connection between horse archery and the thumb release, because there are a lot of people out there who seem to think that the two are inseparable, that the only reason you would be doing thumb release is because you're shooting a horsebow, because that's the right way to shoot it. First off, that's a load of rubbish. You can shoot any bow you like in any style you like, but the connection between horsebows, horse archery and the thumb release, as I have discovered, and as you will realise if you go back and watch the videos properly instead of just skimming through them or just having them on in the background, you realise that the connection is purely circumstantial. The thumb release as a technique, I don't believe, has anything to do with the origins of horse archery. The two just happen to go together in a sort of happy accident. For instance, there's like 1,500 years between the development of the thumb release as documented and the advent of horse archery by a culture that uses thumb release. And all I'm looking at now is, has the thumb release been passed on to other archery traditions? Now, there is a cat amongst the pigeons, but I'm going to keep that. I'm going to keep that one for the time being. That might make an interesting video in its own right in the future. However, so that said about the intention of these videos. The second thing I'm going to say again is that this is just my interpretation of the historical evidence, and I am only going off evidence which we can look at and read or actually view. I'm not going off anecdotal stories as in like, well, somebody told me this and that and blah blah blah. We're going off evidence, as in written documents, pictorial representations, or at the time contemporary pictorial representations, contemporary sculpture, that sort of thing. We're not going off a sculpture that was done in 1863, which was a copy of a sculpture done in 1554, which relates to a legend that took place 25 million billion years ago. We're not doing that, because otherwise we could just keep going and not actually come to any kind of conclusion. Right, that's it. Housework done. Now, the other thing as well, in the last video, that video just went completely haywire. The last 10 minutes of the video got chopped off, and I actually had to go and hunt for them. It got recorded as a completely separate video. God knows how that happened. The battery started going in my microphone system as that last 10 minutes was being filmed, which is why you've got that horrible sound and that buzzing noise over the top of the video, for which I do apologise. I will try not to let it happen again. And for some reason, there's about 15 minutes missing from the middle of the video. So, just to cover those 15 minutes, I was talking about the Egyptian pharaohs and their tradition of archery. And I'd mentioned and talked about the Nubian archers and how they were used within the Egyptian tradition, both military and civil, the fact that they took over for, anyway. But I was actually looking, the bit that's specifically missing, I was talking about Tutankhamun. Now, Tutankhamun's tomb was one of the best preserved tombs to be found, and as were the grave goods and the illustrations on and in the tomb. Now, the first thing I'm going to mention is there's quite a few illustrations, but the main ones we're interested in are the ones where the young king, Tutankhamun, is in a chariot. And he is actually doing archery from the back of a chariot. There's another one where he's actually on foot doing archery. There are no images of him riding a horse, as far as I can remember, within the tomb. But chariots, yes, being driven in a chariot and driving a chariot. Now we know from the evidence and the hieroglyphics and the translations and all the depictions and things like that, that the main mode of transport for the military nobility for almost the entire history of Egypt, the Pharaoh's Egypt, was in chariots. They hunted from chariots, they went to war in chariots, they raced chariots, they went everywhere in chariots. That's what the Egyptian nobility did. And there's a chariot in his tomb. The other things that are in this tomb that we're interested in are there's over 50 separate individual bows, ranging from a Nubian style longbow, which is a proper longbow, a D-shaped profile, everything, just like an English longbow, but with subtle differences, with deflexed tips, just like the Nubian longbows, ranging all the way through to a really, really beautiful black and gold reflex composite bow. Now the reflex bow shows that they are, and this is in 1200 by the way, the composite reflex bow shows that the Egyptians were at the height, they were at the forefront of archery technology. They were creating laminated composite bows. They were creating recurve bows. Now the bow that we're talking about, the reflex, is made from gazelle horn, palm wood and horse sinew. So they were using horses. Horses were around, obviously, so we're doing chariots. However, there were also, amongst the grave goods, archery equipment and paraphernalia. For instance, quivers, arrows, things like that. The surprising thing from an archery point of view, in terms of what we're looking at, was the fact that in the depictions of the young king doing archery, he's wearing an arm guard, a bracer. He's a right-handed shooter, and he's shooting with an arm guard. Now, and there were actually 7, if I remember rightly, 7 arm guards included amongst the archery paraphernalia. Now, think about this for a moment. The only reason you would require an arm guard is if you are suffering from string slap. And the only people who get string slap, apart from those who don't shoot properly, are people shooting inside the bow, as in right-handed shooter, shooting off the left-hand side of the bow, over the back of the hand, and using a finger release of some description. Now that could still be a Slavic type, or a pinch grip, or something like that, but it is definitely not a thumb grip, a thumb release. Because if you shoot with a thumb release, the natural tendency for yourself is to twist the string, which would pull the arrow away from the bow. That's why the thumb release is shot on the outside of the bow, so that the natural string twist, as you draw the string back, doesn't matter, I don't care who you are, what you say you do, when you pull back on that string, even with the thumb release, even if you're using a horn thumb ring, you are still implying twist to that string. Might only be a small amount, but you are imparting twist. The other thing is there are no thumb rings or protectors found in Tutankhamun's tomb. Now, if you are shooting thumb release, you're going to have some kind of thumb protector. Now, the softer the thumb protector, like leather or something like that, the more string twist you are going to impart. So if you're shooting inside the bow, the more likelihood, you know what I'm saying about the arrows. So that's that. He's shooting inside the bow, and he's shooting with the finger release, and that's how it's depicted. If you look further into later tombs, the similar sort of thing is shown, and later depictions on temple walls and things like that all show that kind of archery being used. There's also no evidence of horse archery at all. So I think it's fairly safe to say that even following through the entire 8,000 years of Pharaoh's Egypt, the three dynasties and the kingdoms as well, all the way up to the 1st century when they are heavily embroiled with Rome, there's no evidence of horse archery. And there's no evidence of thumb release. So the two things we're looking for aren't there. Now then, that's covered up the bit that was missing out of the video. Now we get to the fun bit, or what I have found to be the most interesting part of this whole tale, this whole saga of the thumb release. Now we know that the thumb release was introduced during the Shan dynasty. And by the time we get to 1200 BCE, it still hadn't spread to the Sarka, the Scythians, or the Egyptians, or anybody in that area. There's none of the nomadic tribes are using their thumb release that we know of. There's no evidence for it, but then again there's no evidence against it. But there's no evidence, so we can't say they were or they weren't. I personally don't think they were, because I think at some point or other, like for instance in the Scythian graves, we would have found a thumb ring or something. They found other bits and pieces like arrows and stuff, and personal belongings, and lots of ivory and bone and metal jewellery and artefacts, and yet nothing like a thumb ring. There's nothing like that found within the Egyptian tradition either. However, we're going to leave Africa, North Africa and the Mediterranean, and we're going into Asia Minor, or the Arabian Peninsula. And this is where it really gets interesting, because you know I've been saying all the way through, we've got to follow the evidence that we can touch, that we can read, that we can see. Well, in Mesopotamia, I can never say that word right, the Arabian Peninsula, from about 800 BCE, 900 BCE, through to 500, 450 BCE, there is evidence. And it comes from the Assyrian Empire. Now the Assyrian Empire lasted from roughly 900 BCE to 500, 450 BCE. So 400 years or so. And it was extensive, and it covered the whole of what we know today at various times of parts of Turkey, extending all the way up into Azerbaijan, Turkmenistan, Afghanistan, parts of modern day Iran, virtually all of Iraq. Syria gets its name from the Assyrian Empire, so all the land along the coastline of the Mediterranean, the southern coastline of the Mediterranean, is part of the Assyrian Empire. Syria, Jordan, Israel, Egypt, all those countries, Palestine, were all part of the Assyrian Empire. Now, they produced three-dimensional bas-relief carvings depicting their social history, their military history, and everyday events. Now, the bits we are interested in, they start, and we don't know exact dates for when each particular part was carved, but we know they were carved between 800 BCE and 500 BCE. So you've got a 300-year history. And the first thing we are interested in depicts chariot riding and chariot-mounted archery. Now here's the kicker. The archer shown in the chariot is using our thumb release. It's a high thumb release, as in the grip is above the arrow, which drops the arrow down, so it's not a high release. It's an above arrow release, which brings the arrow down, or the way they're doing it brings the arrow down, but nonetheless it is a thumb release. I've actually done a video earlier on, you can go and watch that, where I explain what it is and my feelings about it. So we have discovered a connection between the Assyrian Empire and the Chinese. Now we've got to go back to find out why that connection's there. We've got to go back to the Shan dynasty. The Shan explored and pushed out and wanted to, as I mentioned before, wanted to increase their sphere of influence throughout that part of the world. And it's suggested, and has been suggested, that they traded with Mesopotamia. And if you look at the evidence, that is borne out. First bit of evidence, they had a separate, completely separate name for that part of the world. For instance, they called Persia, or modern what we call Iran today, Ganji, which means land of, Pers, Ganji Pers, which means land of the Persians. Now Persian is a very old name. It predates the Persian Empire. They were nomadic tribes, so they knew of these people. The main name we're looking for, though, is Ganji Suma, land of the Suma, the Sumerians. The Sumerians, along with the first Babylonian Empire, ruled and occupied the Arabian Peninsula from about 5000 BCE up to about 3000 BCE, at which point they were replaced, 5000 BCE to about 2000 BCE, at which point they were replaced by various other tribes, including the Second Babylonian Empire, which moved down, and other things. The Assyrians came around at about 1000 BCE. The height of their empire, 900 BCE. So we know that the Chinese knew of these places. And Shan also traded extensively all over that part of the world, trading with the Saka. We know about his activities with the Saka, and we know about his activities in Indochina. They were starting trade routes all over the world. Now, the central trade route, as solidified and finalised into the Silk Road in about 250 BCE, began a long time before. And basically, you get yourself onto the westernmost border of China, you live over the Himalayas into modern-day Pakistan, through modern-day Iran, and you're in the Assyrian Empire. Now, it's depending on which maps you look at and which accounts you listen to. During the Assyrian Empire's history, the distance from the Assyrian Empire to the Chinese borders varied from about 500 miles to about 750 miles. In terms of the distances that were being travelled for trade, that is nothing. Now, we know the Assyrians utilised silks. We know that the Babylonians utilised silk. That silk came from China. We also know that they talked and traded and utilised each other's technology. For instance, the first ever water clock that comes out in China in about 1100 was actually based on Persian designs. So we know they were trading technology as well. How long that's been going on would be a little bit more difficult to find out, but I'm sure the information's out there, something for me to look up in the future. So I think what's happened as a result of the Shan trading throughout that area and going to Ganji Suma and trading with the people living in that area, those people adopted the thumb release. Admittedly, they did exactly the same as the Chinese did, and they used it from horseback, but they utilised it in a slightly different way. Now, this is what I think is wonderful about the Assyrian Empire. They were innovators. Now, we know that the Babylonians, the second Babylonian, from about 2000 BCE to 1000 BCE, we know that they actually created plywood. They laminated different types of wood to create high strength, low weight wooden products, such as their chariots. Now, it's not a massive leap to say that they would, in all likelihood, have laminated materials together to create bows. And again, if you look at the 3D bas-relief carvings, you see their bows, and they are flat-ish, recurved bows. Now, the only way to get that sort of flat, mostly flat profile is through lamination. So they are creating laminated composite bows of a type which you don't see anywhere else. For instance, the Egyptian laminates are actually really thick and chunky in terms of profile. The Scythian composite bows, again, thick and chunky in profile, almost circular in parts, and yet the Assyrian ones are virtually flat, with a slightly curved back to them, but essentially flat. So they were innovating. So it's not, again, it's not a leap to suppose that an innovative people would adopt the thumb release as they did. Now the next series of carvings in the bas relief actually depicts what I think is the transition from the chariot-based military to the horse-based military. And there is a progression which goes through these bas reliefs. Now, why do I say transition? Well, if you think about what a chariot is, it's a mobile platform for people to stand on and pulled by two horses. Now the Assyrian chariots were two crew, as in one driving, one shooting. The Chinese were three crew, one driving, one shooting, one defending. The Assyrians, the next step in their phase, showing horse archery, is actually still two horses, two riders, but we have one driving the two horses, controlling the two horses, and one shooting. All they've done is got rid of the chariot, of the bulky chariot. But you've still, and why would they do that? Well, think about it. If you've got a charioteer who is skilled and experienced in controlling two horses, you're not just going to abandon him to do nothing. You're going to give him a job. And that job was riding and controlling two horses. Minimum amount of training required. The archer, who was used to just standing on the back of the platform, shooting from a moving target, now has, instead of an inanimate wooden platform, he's got a living, breathing, moving platform that's just a different shape. Now if you look at the carvings, that's exactly what we see. One controlling, one shooting. I think that's fantastic. And I don't care, that's the way I'm interpreting, and I think it's a wonderful idea. The next carvings we see in the sequence is pure horse archery. Again, using the thumb release though. So I think we are seeing images of an innovative people creating their own unique, at the time, archery equipment. I think we're seeing the origins of the Asiatic recurve bow as well, as in the flattened recurve type bow, which we all know and love. And the adoption of the thumb release, and the adoption of horse archery, horse-mounted archery, using the thumb release. You've got three unique things going on there in the Assyrian Empire. Now those things spread off into other parts of the Arabian Peninsula to be adopted by Persians and the next civilization, which was the Third Babylonian Empire, people like that. But they weren't as innovative as the Assyrians, I don't believe. Anyway, hope you found that interesting. Have a look at the Assyrian bas reliefs. They're actually in the British Museum at the moment, or have been for quite a while actually, but they've been photographed extensively and the images are available online, and some of them are, if even just to consider them as carvings, incredibly accurate. The detail is really crisp, really well made, and it shows a lot of information as well. Anyway, hope you found that interesting and not too boring. I'll try to keep this one a little bit shorter. Stay safe, keep slinging the sticks, and we'll talk again soon. Cheers, guys.